Impeach me and I'll sue you. That's essentially what President Trump is threatening. He tweeted today, if the partisan Democrats ever tried to impeach, I would first head to the U.S. Supreme Court. This comes as a major showdown is brewing between the president and House Democrats. Lawmakers want to subpoena current and former White House aides over their statements in the Mueller report, specifically former White House counsel Don McGahn. The House Judiciary Committee has issued a subpoena for Mr. McGahn, but the White House is fighting back, arguing they will exert executive privilege over his testimony. For more on that, let's bring in CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. All right, Weijia, why executive privilege?
Well, that is their tool right now in order to block these testimonies from happening, in order to cover up any evidence that they do not want lawmakers to see. However, lawmakers are making clear that ship has sailed because they did not exert executive privilege before to withhold this information or to keep key witnesses from testifying. And so the argument there is that, you didn't use it before and it's too late now because we have a job to do. And as you've been talking about, as we've been reporting, that battle on Capitol Hill is only intensifying and Democrats are still split about how to proceed. So the House.
Hey there, it's John. And today is a good one. The Supreme Court issued a sweeping ruling declaring Trump had exceeded constitutional boundaries, shattering the legal foundations of presidential power. The decision, including from Trump's own appointees, sent shockwaves through Washington and forever altered the course of executive authority. This wasn't a narrow ruling about a single policy dispute. This was a comprehensive judicial rebuke that examined the president's conduct across multiple areas of governance. The court identified patterns of overreach that went far beyond ordinary political disagreements, finding that Trump had claimed authority the Constitution never granted, issued directives that violated fundamental separation of powers principles, and created what amounted to an alternative system of governance that circumvented congressional oversight. The ruling was devastating in its scope and damning in its conclusions. The court didn't stop at merely identifying constitutional violations.
Oversight Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, they want to do their jobs and present the full picture. And of course, it's very different to read a report that someone else wrote as a result of that person's investigation, rather to investigate themselves. And so they want a chance to look at those documents, to have a complete unredacted copy of the report, and to talk to key witnesses. And of course, Don McGahn may be the key witness. He's mentioned more than 150 times. And according to the report and Special Counsel Mueller, the president asked him to fire Mueller, who was leading this investigation, and McGahn refused. Okay. So they have a lot of questions.
So let me ask you this. McGahn no longer works for the administration, right? So in asserting privilege, can the president stop McGahn from doing it if McGahn wants to go?
Well, that's what White House lawyers are trying to work out right now, because, the argument is that McGahn was a White House lawyer and he was serving the president and the presidency at the time. And that is different now. But they will argue that at the time he was serving the presidency. And so it's unclear if the White House will actually move forward. They have not said yet. We are trying to get more information about their next move. But certainly, as you mentioned at the top here, it is the move because, it's really.
It went further, removing the legal shields that had protected Trump and his top advisors from accountability. Previous judicial decisions had afforded presidents significant immunity from lawsuits and criminal prosecution, recognizing the unique demands of executive leadership. But this ruling drew a clear line, declaring that when presidents exceed their constitutional authority, when they violate the fundamental limits of their office, the normal immunities and protections no longer apply. This was the moment everything changed. The Supreme Court had essentially given Congress the smoking gun it needed. The justices had provided judicial confirmation that constitutional violations had occurred, established legal precedent that presidents could be held accountable, and created the political cover necessary for congressional action. Lawmakers who had been hesitant to pursue impeachment, who had worried about appearing partisan or overreaching.
The fallout and the fight tonight shifts to Capitol Hill after the release of the redacted Mueller report, with House Democrats demanding to see more, slapping a subpoena on the Department of Justice.
We need the whole report, including the underlying documents, unredacted.
It's just the beginning of a new legal battle with the Trump administration.
When does this ever stop? I mean, if we gave them the unredacted report, if we gave him all the tax returns unredacted as well, he would still want something else.
And it fuels the political battle over impeachment.
It's certainly the case that you can see lots of evidence that this president deserves to be impeached.
The progressive Democratic base and lawmakers who represent it, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, argue the report shows Congress should move forward in exploring impeachment. 2020 candidate and Senator Elizabeth Warren tweeting today the House should initiate impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. But House leaders have tried to tamp down impeachment talk. President Trump's trying to have it both ways, claiming vindication from the report, which found no criminal wrongdoing,
suddenly had the highest court in the land backing their efforts. The institutional support they needed had arrived. Within hours of the ruling, something unprecedented began to unfold. House leaders who had been preparing for this moment, who had been gathering evidence and consulting constitutional scholars for months, moved with breathtaking speed. Emergency sessions were called, urgent meetings convened, and articles of impeachment finalized. There was no hesitation, no delay, no waiting to see how the political winds might shift. Congress struck with surgical precision, filing impeachment papers that would target not just the president, but his entire leadership team. The articles of impeachment were comprehensive in their scope and devastating in their detail. They charged Trump with systemic abuse of office,
yet calling parts of it total BS. In a tweet today, he warns, watch out for people that take so-called notes when the notes never existed until needed. That appears to be a dig at his former White House counsel, Don McGahn. The Mueller report revealed the president angrily asked last year why McGahn took notes in meetings. McGahn responded, it's because he's a real lawyer, explaining it's not a bad thing. The report paints a picture of a West Wing plagued by dishonesty, aides and advisors ignoring potentially problematic instructions from the president. All of it front page news across the country, with some Americans unmoved.
I just think the American people have kind of made up their mind with everything that's come out before.
He's not a perfect guy. I think he's a despicable human being. He's done a lot of good things for the country.
Late tonight, the Justice Department called that subpoena from Democrats premature and unnecessary, since the Attorney General already offered to let some lawmakers see a redacted version of the report with fewer parts blacked out. But today, Democrats rejected that offer, saying they want more members to be able to see the whole thing.
Documenting a pattern of exceeding presidential authority across multiple areas of governance. They accused him of obstruction of justice, detailing how he had refused to cooperate with congressional investigations and defied court orders. They alleged unauthorized creation of federal agencies and positions, bypassing the constitutional requirement for congressional approval. They charged him with contempt of Congress for ignoring subpoenas and withholding documents. They even invoked the Emoluments Clause, accusing Trump of profiting from his office in ways the Constitution explicitly prohibits. But here's where the impeachment effort broke entirely new ground. The articles didn't stop with Trump. They named cabinet secretaries, senior advisors, and key officials who had enabled the president's misconduct. The charges detailed how these officials had issued illegal directives at Trump's command, resisted lawful oversight from Congress, and helped the administration defy court orders. The articles made the case that these officials were complicit in constitutional violations, that they had abetted the president's misconduct, and that they bore responsibility for their actions. This represented the most sweeping use of impeachment powers in American history. Previous impeachments had focused on individual presidents or vice presidents, generally addressing specific acts of misconduct. But this effort targeted an entire administration, holding everyone accountable who participated in the constitutional violations. It was Congress saying that no one who enabled presidential overreach would escape scrutiny, that the entire system of governance had to be held to account. The immediate response from the administration was chaos. The West Wing erupted in emergency meetings as officials tried to comprehend what was happening. Some cabinet members circled the wagons, insisting the Supreme Court ruling was politically motivated and vowing to fight the impeachment efforts. But others looked at the evidence, looked at the comprehensive nature of the articles, and realized they were in serious trouble. They understood that the Supreme Court ruling had removed the legal protections that might have shielded them, that Congress Congress had the ammunition it needed and that the momentum for impeachment was unstoppable. Whispers began spreading through Washington that some senior officials were already reaching out to congressional investigators, signaling their willingness to cooperate. They were looking for immunity deals, trying to negotiate reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Trump and other officials. The infighting within the cabinet became intense, with loyalists clashing with pragmatists. Some wanted to go down fighting, insisting they had done nothing wrong. Others recognized the political and legal realities, understanding that self-preservation required abandoning the president. The divisions within the administration became impossible to hide. There was no unified defense strategy, no coordinated response to the impeachment threat. Different officials were giving contradictory messages, creating confusion about what the administration actually believed or planned to do. The chaos was exactly what Congress had hoped for, because divided enemies are easier to defeat, panicked officials make mistakes, and an administration in disarray can't effectively fight impeachment. Resignations began almost immediately at lower levels, with aides and staffers who didn't want to be associated with an administration facing comprehensive impeachment proceedings. They didn't want to be called as witnesses or implicated in wrongdoing. Every departure weakened the administration further. Every resignation was an admission that the situation was untenable. Every person who left was someone who might eventually testify against Trump. The bipartisan nature of the impeachment effort added to the pressure. Republicans were breaking ranks, joining Democrats in saying that the Supreme Court ruling left them no choice but to support impeachment. They framed their decision as putting Constitution over party, as recognizing that they couldn't defend an administration the highest court had determined violated constitutional principles. This bipartisanship gave the effort legitimacy, made it harder for Trump to dismiss it as a partisan witch hunt, and increased the likelihood of conviction in the Senate. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Never before had a Supreme Court ruling triggered immediate impeachment proceedings. Never before had Congress targeted an entire cabinet simultaneously. Never before had impeachment articles been drafted and introduced within hours of a judicial decision. This was the system of checks and balances operating at maximum intensity, with the judicial branch checking presidential power and the legislative branch responding with comprehensive accountability measures. The Supreme Court ruling that triggered this cascade of events deserves deeper examination because it provides the legal foundation for everything that followed. The decision came as a culmination of multiple cases challenging presidential authority, and the court's opinion systematically dismantled arguments the administration had relied upon for years. The justices found that Trump's use of emergency powers was not legitimate, that his national security justifications did not authorize his actions, and that his claims of inherent executive authority went far beyond what the Constitution permits. What made the ruling particularly devastating was its broad scope. The court didn't just address one issue or one specific action. It examined the entire pattern of the administration's conduct, identifying recurring problems with how presidential power had been exercised. The decision established new limits on executive authority, creating precedents that would constrain future presidents regardless of party. It was a statement from the judicial branch that the Constitution's limits apply to everyone, even the most powerful office in the land. The ruling also opened the door to legal challenges and criminal prosecutions against Trump and his advisors. By removing or limiting the immunity protections that had shielded them, the court essentially said that when presidents violate constitutional limits, they can be held accountable through civil lawsuits, criminal prosecution, and congressional oversight. This was a fundamental shift in how the legal system treats presidents, establishing that the normal immunities and privileges don't apply when you've exceeded your constitutional authority. Congress had clearly been preparing for this moment. The speed of their response indicated they had been working behind the scenes for weeks or months, drafting articles of impeachment, gathering evidence, building legal arguments, consulting constitutional experts. They had been waiting for the Supreme Court to provide the judicial confirmation they needed, the institutional backing that would make impeachment not just justified, but necessary. When the ruling came down, they were ready to move immediately. The impeachment articles themselves are remarkably detailed and well documented. Each charge is supported by specific evidence, examples of conduct, and citations to the Supreme Court ruling. The articles make a compelling case that Trump engaged in conduct warranting removal from office, that his violations of constitutional limits go far beyond ordinary political disagreements. They document a pattern of behavior that undermines the rule of law and threatens the foundations of American democracy. But the articles targeting cabinet members are what truly make this effort unprecedented. They name specific secretaries and senior advisors, describe their conduct in detail, and make the case that they are complicit in constitutional violations. The articles charge these officials with enabling Trump's misconduct, with issuing illegal directives, with resisting lawful oversight, with helping the administration defy courts and Congress. They demand accountability for everyone involved in the violation. The legal theory behind this approach is significant. It recognizes that constitutional violations often require multiple people to succeed. Trump couldn't exceed his authority alone. He needed cabinet members to carry out his orders, advisors to provide legal justification, a whole team enabling the conduct. Congress is saying everyone involved bears responsibility. The people who helped Trump violate constitutional limits should face accountability regardless of their official positions or proximity to the president. The political strategy is equally sophisticated. By targeting the entire cabinet, Congress creates pressure that forces officials to choose between loyalty to Trump and self-preservation. Some will defect, seeking immunity deals and cooperating with investigators. Others will fight, but they'll be weakened by the defections. The administration will be thrown into chaos, unable to mount an effective defense against impeachment. This strategy is designed to maximize pressure, create panic, and accelerate the collapse of the administration. The effect on the cabinet has been exactly what Congress hoped for. Emergency meetings in the West Wing have become constant, with officials trying to figure out how to respond to the impeachment threat. Some are still loyal to Trump, still insisting everything was legal, still vowing to fight. But even they know the situation is dire, that the Supreme Court ruling and the congressional response have created a crisis that might destroy the entire administration. Other cabinet members are panicking, looking at the evidence, understanding that they could actually be removed from office, that they could face criminal charges, that their careers and reputations are on the line. They're quietly reaching out to congressional investigators, looking for deals, looking for immunity, looking for ways to avoid being dragged down with Trump. They see what's coming and they want to get out before the whole thing collapses on top of them. This has created intense infighting within the cabinet, with different officials pursuing different strategies. The loyalists are trying to maintain some semblance of unity, insisting everyone should stick together. The pragmatists are looking for exit strategies, trying to negotiate their own survival. The tensions between these factions are becoming impossible to hide, and the infighting is weakening the administration's ability to respond coherently to the impeachment threat. Analysts across the political spectrum are calling this the most sweeping use of impeachment powers in American history. It's not just about removing one person, but about holding an entire administration accountable. It's about saying that everyone who participated in constitutional violations will face consequences. That's never happened before. Previous impeachments focused on the president, maybe one or two others, but this is targeting potentially dozens of officials at the highest levels of the executive branch. House and Senate leaders are framing this as a moment of existential importance for American democracy. They're saying the stakes are nothing less than restoring constitutional order and the rule of law to the highest offices. They're arguing that Congress has to act decisively to save the system from an administration that violated constitutional limits across the board. This framing gives the effort moral urgency and makes it harder for opponents to dismiss it as ordinary politics. The Supreme Court ruling is what made this possible. It didn't just rule against Trump on one issue, but issued a broad decision that limited presidential authority generally, that said Trump exceeded his constitutional powers, that exposed patterns of illegality throughout the administration, that opened the door for legal challenges and criminal prosecutions. Congress looked at that ruling and said, now we have what we need. Now we can move forward with impeachment knowing the Supreme Court has our back. knowing the highest judicial authority in the country has determined Trump violated constitutional limits, provides the smoking gun, the evidence that makes impeachment not just justified but necessary. If the Supreme Court says a president exceeded his authority and violated the Constitution, what else can Congress do but impeach? The question answers itself. The only appropriate response when the highest court confirms constitutional violations is to remove the offenders from office. The speed of the congressional response is also telling. Within hours of the Supreme Court ruling, impeachment papers were filed. This means Congress was ready, they had articles drafted, evidence compiled, and were just waiting for the right moment. The Supreme Court ruling provided that moment, gave them the legal cover they needed, the institutional backing, the proof that Trump's conduct wasn't just politically problematic, but constitutionally impermissible. So they moved immediately before Trump could respond, before his allies could organize a defense, before the political moment could pass. They struck fast and hard with the most comprehensive impeachment articles in American history, targeting not just Trump, but his entire leadership team, creating a crisis that's threatening to bring down the whole executive branch. The strategy is working exactly as intended. The administration is in chaos, officials are defecting, and the momentum for removal is building. This is democracy fighting back, checks and balances working at maximum intensity. The practical effects of this unprecedented impeachment effort are devastating the administration. Cabinet officials who just weeks ago felt secure in their positions are now facing the real possibility of removal from office and criminal prosecution. The emergency meetings in the West Wing have become frantic as officials try to figure out how to respond, but there's no clear path forward. The Supreme Court ruling has removed their legal defenses. The impeachment articles are comprehensive and well documented, and the bipartisan support makes it impossible to dismiss the effort as partisan politics. Some senior cabinet members are quietly signaling their willingness to cooperate with congressional investigators. They see what's coming and they want to protect themselves. They're looking for immunity deals, looking for ways to avoid being dragged down with Trump. They understand that Congress is serious, that the Supreme Court ruling gave lawmakers the ammunition they needed, that impeachment is moving forward with unstoppable momentum. They're trying to get out before the whole thing collapses on top of them. Other cabinet members are still loyal to Trump, still trying to defend him, still insisting everything was legal. But even they know the situation is dire. Even they can see that the Supreme Court ruling and the immediate congressional response have created a crisis that might destroy the entire administration. The divisions between loyalists and pragmatists are becoming impossible to bridge, and the infighting is preventing any effective response. The resignations that have already occurred at lower levels are just the beginning. Rumors suggest more senior officials might follow, that some cabinet members are considering resigning rather than facing impeachment proceedings that would be humiliating and career-ending. Every resignation further weakens Trump's position. Every person who leaves is someone who might testify against him. Every departure makes the administration look more illegitimate and unsustainable. The cabinet collapse is feeding on itself. Each resignation encourages others, each defection weakens Trump further, and the whole thing spirals toward inevitable failure. The system of checks and balances that the founders designed is working exactly as intended. The Supreme Court checking presidential power through a landmark ruling, Congress checking both the president and the executive branch through comprehensive impeachment. House and Senate leaders are pushing hard on the urgency narrative. They're saying this isn't normal politics. This is a constitutional crisis. The Supreme Court has determined the president exceeded his authority. The administration has systematically violated constitutional limits, and Congress has a duty to act immediately to restore the rule of law. They're framing impeachment not as partisan revenge, but as constitutional necessity, as the only appropriate response when the Supreme Court says a president has violated fundamental limits on power. This framing is resonating because it's not just Democrats saying this. Republicans are breaking ranks, joining the impeachment effort, saying they have to put Constitution over party, that the Supreme Court ruling leaves them no choice, that they can't defend an administration the highest court has said violated constitutional principles. The bipartisan support gives impeachment legitimacy, makes conviction in the Senate more likely, and makes it harder for Trump to survive politically, even if he somehow avoids removal. The historical nature of this moment is hard to overstate. We've had presidential impeachments before, but never one triggered so directly and immediately by a Supreme Court ruling. Never one that targeted an entire cabinet simultaneously. Never one with this level of bipartisan support so quickly. Never one where the charges were this comprehensive and well documented. This is the system of checks and balances operating at maximum intensity. Democracy under stress, but also democracy working. The timeline for all of this is compressed and urgent. Congress is moving fast. The impeachment articles were filed within hours of the Supreme Court ruling. Hearings will start soon. Votes will follow quickly. This isn't a drawn-out process. This is Congress acting with urgency because they believe the constitutional crisis requires immediate action. That compressed timeline increases pressure on everyone. Cabinet members have to decide quickly whether to cooperate or fight. Trump has to mount a defense without adequate preparation time. Republicans have to choose sides before they've fully thought through the political implications. The speed makes mistakes more likely, makes panic more intense, and makes the eventual outcome more dramatic because everything happens so fast. Every day brings new developments, new defections, new revelations. The administration is in freefall, and there's no way to stop it. The combination of the Supreme Court ruling and Congress's immediate comprehensive impeachment response represents the most dramatic institutional check on presidential power in American history. The court determined Trump exceeded his authority. Congress responded by moving to remove not just Trump, but his entire enabler network. The cabinet is collapsing, officials are defecting, and the administration is in chaos. Removal looks increasingly inevitable. This is the system working, checks and balances operating at full force, democracy defending itself against executive overreach. Whether it succeeds or fails will determine whether American constitutional government survives this crisis. But the fact that the attempt is being made with this much institutional support, with this much speed and comprehensiveness, shows the system still has fight in it. The Supreme Court and Congress are both saying no to presidential overreach, and Trump is caught between both branches with nowhere to go. The momentum is building, the support is growing, and the end result seems increasingly certain. What happens next will be historic. The Senate trial will be the crucial test. Conviction requires a 2/3 vote, 67 senators. Democrats don't have that many on their own. Even with all of them voting to convict, they need significant Republican support. The question is whether enough Republicans will vote to remove Trump and cabinet members based on the Supreme Court ruling and the evidence. Given the bipartisan support already evident in the House, given the institutional backing from the Supreme Court, given the comprehensive nature of the evidence, it seems likely they will. Republicans who vote to convict will have cover from the Supreme Court ruling. They can say they're following the court's determination, upholding the Constitution, not being partisan. Enough of them will reach that conclusion to get to 67 votes. Trump and several cabinet members will be removed from office and will have a constitutional crisis about succession and who runs the executive branch. The entire government will be in flux, but the rule of law will have been preserved. The bottom line is clear. The combination of the Supreme Court ruling and Congress's immediate comprehensive impeachment response represents the most dramatic institutional check on presidential power in American history. The court determined Trump exceeded his authority. Congress responded by moving to remove not just Trump, but his entire enabler network. The cabinet is collapsing, officials are defecting, the administration is in chaos, and removal looks increasingly inevitable. The Supreme Court and Congress are both pushing back against Trump's overreach, a rare moment of systemic checks operating at full force. Whether they succeed will determine if constitutional government survives, but the fact that the system is fighting back shows it still has life in it. What happens next will be historic.